The rain hammered against the diner windows like angry fists demanding entry. Sarah Martinez pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the storm transform the Boston streets into rivers of darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed and exhausted. 23 years old, and she felt ancient. The weight of the world had settled on her shoulders the day her mother's medical bills started arriving, each envelope another nail in the coffin of her dreams. She had exactly $12.37 in her checking account. The number burned in her mind like a brand. Tomorrow was payday, but tomorrow felt like a lifetime away when your stomach was eating itself. She'd walked past 3 grocery stores on her way to this diner, unable to afford even a loaf of bread. Her pride had kept her from calling friends, from admitting just how bad things had gotten since she dropped out of nursing school to care for her dying mother. The diner was nearly empty at this late hour. Just Sarah, a tired waitress named Betty who'd stopped asking if she wanted anything beside water, and a young man who'd stumbled in 10 minutes ago. He sat 3 booths down, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. His clothes hung off his frame, torn and stained. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They held a desperate, haunted quality she recognized in her own mirror every morning. Sarah watched as he pulled coins from his pockets, counting them over and over with trembling fingers. She could see his lips moving, doing the math, hoping somehow the numbers would be different this time. They never were. He flagged down Betty and ordered a cup of coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. When Betty brought it, Sarah noticed he wrapped both hands around it like it was the most precious thing in the world, absorbing its warmth before taking even a single sip. Something inside Sarah cracked open. She thought about her mother, gone now for 6 weeks. In those final days, her mother had told her something that had seemed almost cruel at the time. "Sarah," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the oxygen machine, "when you have nothing left to give, that's when giving matters most. That's when you discover who you really are." Sarah had wanted to scream at those words. What good was kindness when you couldn't pay the electric bill? What did character matter when you were drowning? But now, watching the stranger clutch his coffee cup like a lifeline, she understood. This was the moment her mother had been talking about. This was a test. She caught Betty's eye and gestured her over. "That man over there," Sarah said quietly, "I want to pay for his meal. Whatever he wants." Betty's eyebrows shot up. She'd served Sarah enough times to know her situation. "Honey, are you sure?" Sarah nodded, her hands already reaching for her wallet. She pulled out one of the 2 precious $20 bills she'd been saving. It was meant for her phone bill. The disconnection notice had arrived yesterday. Betty walked to the young man's booth. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she watched his face transform. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like hope breaking through storm clouds. He ordered slowly, carefully, his voice cracking. "The meatloaf special." Betty smiled and patted his shoulder before heading to the kitchen. The young man turned to look at Sarah. Their eyes met across the diner. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Sarah nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. She stood quickly, leaving before her food arrived, before she could think too hard about what she'd just done. The rain soaked her immediately as she stepped outside, but she barely noticed. She'd given away her last meal, her safety net, her cushion against disaster. Walking home through the storm, Sarah felt lighter somehow. Hungrier, yes. Scared about tomorrow, absolutely. But also strangely at peace. She'd chosen kindness when logic screamed at her to choose survival. She'd honored her mother's final lesson. As she climbed the stairs to her tiny apartment, she had no idea that the stranger in the diner was named Marcus Chen, or that he would spend the next 5 years clawing his way back from rock bottom, never forgetting the woman who'd saved him on his darkest night. Marcus Chen sat in his car outside the medical center, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. 5 years had passed since that rainy night in the diner, but the memory remained crystal clear. He could still taste that meatloaf, still feel the warmth spreading through his body with each bite. It hadn't just been food. It had been proof that goodness existed in a world that had tried to convince him otherwise. That night had been his lowest point. He'd lost his research position at the university after his gambling addiction had spiraled out of control. His family had cut him off after he'd stolen from them 1 too many times. He'd been living in his car for 3 weeks, and on that particular evening, He'd been seriously considering whether life was worth continuing. Then a stranger with sad eyes had bought him dinner, and something inside him had shifted. The road back hadn't been easy. Marcus had checked himself into a treatment program the next day, using the last of his credit to pay for it. He'd attended meetings every single day for 2 years. He'd worked 3 jobs simultaneously, saving every penny, rebuilding his reputation one honest interaction at a time. He'd apologized to everyone he'd hurt, even though many refused to forgive him. He'd earned his way back into the research community, starting at the bottom, proving his worth through relentless dedication. Now he was Dr. Marcus Chen again, not just in title but in truth. He'd pioneered a new surgical technique for cardiac trauma, and his work was saving lives. He'd published papers, won awards, rebuilt relationships with his family. But through it all, he'd never forgotten the woman in the diner. He'd tried to find her, had even hired a private investigator, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, 3 miles across the city, Sarah Martinez was fighting a different kind of battle. The years had been brutal. After that night in the diner, things had gotten worse before they got better. She'd been evicted from her apartment. She'd lived in a shelter for 4 months. She'd worked every odd job imaginable, cleaning offices at night, serving coffee at dawn, walking dogs in the afternoons. But Sarah had inherited her mother's stubborn streak. She'd saved every spare dollar, taken online courses during stolen moments, and slowly, painfully rebuilt her life. She'd gotten a job as a medical receptionist, then as a nursing assistant. She'd moved into a small but clean apartment. She'd started dating again, though nothing had lasted. The struggle had hardened something in her, made trust difficult. Last month, she'd finally saved enough to re-enroll in nursing school. It felt like a miracle. She was going to finish what she'd started, honor her mother's dream for her. She'd been so focused on this goal that she'd ignored the warning signs her body had been sending. The fatigue she'd attributed to working double shifts. The chest pain she'd blamed on stress. The shortness of breath she convinced herself was just anxiety. Then yesterday, while walking to class, the world had tilted sideways. Sarah had felt a crushing pressure in her chest, like an elephant sitting on her ribcage. The sidewalk had rushed up to meet her. Someone had called for help. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of sirens and a strange sense of peace, as if a mother was waiting somewhere nearby. She'd woken up in the cardiac intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred. A kind-faced nurse named Jennifer had explained that she'd suffered a massive heart attack. At 28 years old, Sarah's heart had nearly given up. The years of stress, poor nutrition, and exhaustion had taken their toll. She needed emergency surgery, something called a coronary artery bypass. Without it, she had maybe a week to live. The problem was insurance. Sarah's student insurance wouldn't cover the procedure. The hospital estimated the cost at over $200,000. $200,000 might as well have been $2 million. Sarah had $1,800 in her savings account. She'd worked so hard to build that small cushion, and it was laughable in the face of this crisis. Jennifer had held her hand and promised they'd figure something out, but Sarah could see the worry in her eyes. She'd seen that look before, in the faces of the nurses who'd cared for her mother. It was a look of someone who knew the system was broken but was powerless to fix it. As Sarah lay in that hospital bed, watching the sunset through the window, she thought about the young man in the diner. She wondered if he'd gotten his life together, if that meal had mattered. She hoped so. She hoped her gesture hadn't been wasted. At least then something good would have come from all of this. At least one person would have been saved. Dr. Marcus Chen stood in front of the surgical board, reviewing the emergency cases scheduled for the week. His reputation as a cardiac surgeon had grown considerably over the past year, and he was now one of the most requested specialists at Boston Memorial. Every case was important, every life precious, but he approached each surgery with the same intensity that had defined his comeback. He owed the world a debt he could never fully repay. His assistant, Paula, approached with a tablet. "Dr. Chen, we have a critical case that just came through. 28-year-old female, massive coronary event, needs immediate bypass surgery. The problem is complicated, though." Marcus looked up from his notes. "What's the complication?" Paula hesitated. "She has no insurance coverage for the procedure. The family is trying to arrange payment, but it looks difficult. Dr. Morrison was supposed to take it, but is stuck in another surgery that's going longer than expected. You're the only one available who can perform this operation. Marcus felt a familiar pull of purpose. Schedule it. I'll review her chart immediately. Paula shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Chen, the administration is concerned about the payment situation. They are suggesting we transfer her to County General. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He remembered being that person, the one people looked past, the one whose value was questioned. Absolutely not, he said firmly. This is a teaching hospital. We treat patients who need us. Schedule the surgery for first thing tomorrow morning. As Paula left to make arrangements, Marcus pulled up the patient file on his computer. Sarah Martinez, age 28. The name struck something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. He studied her medical history, noting the pattern of stress-related issues, the signs of chronic malnutrition in her blood work. This was someone who'd been fighting hard for a long time. He felt a kinship with her struggle. In her hospital room, Sarah was receiving visitors. Her friend Lisa had come, tears streaming down her face. They'd met at the shelter years ago and had stayed close through everything. I'm going to start a fundraiser, Lisa insisted. We'll get the money somehow. Sarah managed a weak smile. Lisa, nobody raises $200,000 on the internet. This isn't a movie. But Lisa was already typing on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm writing your story. People need to know who you are, what you've been through. You're the most selfless person I know, Sarah. Remember when you gave that guy your last meal at the diner? Remember how you used to share your shelter dinner with anyone who looked hungrier? That's who you are. Sarah closed her eyes, exhausted. That was a long time ago. I don't even know if that guy survived. Maybe kindness doesn't matter in the end. Maybe we're all just one disaster away from the end, and nothing we do makes a difference. Lisa grabbed her hand. Don't you dare give up. Not now. Not after everything you survived. After Lisa left, Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to the rhythm of a damaged heart on the monitor. Each beat was a reminder that time was running out. She thought about her mother's words again. When you have nothing left to give, that's when giving matters most. But what happened when you had nothing left, period? What happened when you'd given everything and the universe just kept taking? The next morning, Marcus arrived at the hospital at 5 a.m., as he always did. He reviewed Sarah's scans one more time, mapping out the surgery in his mind. It would be challenging. The damage was extensive. But he performed miracles before. He had to believe he could do it again. At 6:30, he went to meet his patient before surgery. The pre-op nurse had already administered the sedative, but Sarah was still conscious, her eyes unfocused but aware. Marcus introduced himself, taking her hand in his. Ms. Martinez, I'm Dr. Chen. I'm going to be performing your surgery today. I want you to know that you're in good hands. I'm going to do everything in my power to fix your heart. Sarah looked at him, her vision blurry from the medication. There was something familiar about him, something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. Thank you, she whispered. I'm scared. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Fear is normal, but I want you to focus on something. Think about the strongest moment of your life. Think about a time when you were brave. Hold on to that. As the anesthesiologist prepared to intubate Sarah, Marcus studied her face one more time. The familiarity nagged at him. Had they met before? It seemed impossible, yet something about her resonated in his memory like a half-remembered dream. He shook off the feeling. He needed to focus. This surgery would take every ounce of skill he possessed. As Sarah slipped into unconsciousness, her last thought was of that rainy night 5 years ago. The diner. The stranger with the haunted eyes. The choice she'd made when she had nothing left to give. She hoped, as darkness claimed her, that he'd found his way to a better place. The surgery had been underway for 3 hours, and Marcus Chen's hands moved with practiced precision through the delicate architecture of Sarah Martinez's heart. His team worked in synchronized silence, each member anticipating his needs before he voiced them. The damage was worse than the scans had suggested. Years of accumulated stress had created a landscape of scarred tissue and compromised vessels. He'd already bypassed 2 coronary arteries and was working on the third. Suction here. Marcus directed, his voice calm despite the complexity of the procedure. The surgical resident assisting him watched in awe as Marcus navigated around a particularly tricky section of damaged tissue. This was why people called him the miracle worker. He saw possibilities where others saw only risk. He found paths through impossibility. During a brief pause while the perfusionist adjusted the heart-lung bypass machine, Marcus found his mind wandering to his patient's file. He'd read it thoroughly last night, unable to sleep. Sarah Martinez had been through hell. Orphaned young, dropped out of nursing school to care for her dying mother, spent time homeless, clawed her way back to stability only to have her body betray her. The pattern of her life read like his own in so many ways. Different details, same struggle. There was something else, too, something that had kept him awake. 5 years ago, according to her bank records that the financial department had pulled, she'd been living on virtually nothing. Yet her friend Lisa's fundraising post mentioned an act of kindness at a diner, buying dinner for a stranger when she herself had nothing. The timeline matched. The location matched. But it seemed too incredible to be true. Dr. Chen. The scrub nurse's voice brought him back to the present. Sorry, continue, Marcus said, refocusing on the delicate work before him. He couldn't afford distraction, not when Sarah's life hung in the balance. Yet as his hands moved through the familiar motions of the surgery, his mind kept circling back to that night. The woman with the sad eyes who'd changed everything. 4 hours into the surgery, they encountered a major complication. Sarah's heart, already weakened, began showing signs of arrhythmia. The monitors erupted in urgent beeping. She's going into VFib, the anesthesiologist announced, her voice tight. Marcus didn't hesitate, charging to 200 joules. Everyone clear. The defibrillator paddles delivered their shock, and Sarah's body jerked on the table. The heart rhythm steadied briefly, then deteriorated again. Again, 300 joules. Another shock. This time the rhythm held, but it was weak. Freddie, Marcus made a split-second decision. We're going to have to do something unconventional here. I need everyone's absolute focus. He began a procedure he developed but hadn't yet published, a way of supporting the heart muscle while completing the bypass. It was risky, unproven in this exact scenario, but it was Sarah's only chance. The next 2 hours were the longest of Marcus's career. Every decision carried life or death weight. His team trusted him completely, following his lead even when his instructions seemed to defy standard protocol. Slowly, gradually, Sarah's heart began to respond. The new bypasses took hold. The muscle started contracting with more strength. By the time Marcus made the final suture, 7 hours had elapsed, and he was drenched in sweat beneath his surgical gown. "Let's close her up," he said finally, allowing himself a small breath of relief. The hardest part was over. Now they just had to hope her body would accept the repairs and begin healing. As the team worked on closing the surgical site, Marcus stepped back, pulling off his gloves. He'd done everything medically possible. The rest was up to Sarah's will to live. Later, in the scrub room, Marcus sat heavily on the bench. His hands were trembling with exhaustion. Paula found him there 20 minutes later. "Dr. Chen, the patient is stable and moving to recovery. You did it." Marcus nodded, too tired to speak. Paula sat beside him. "There's something you should see. That fundraiser her friend started, it's gone viral. The story about her giving away her last meal is all over social media. People are calling her the Angel of Boston." Marcus looked up sharply. "What exactly does the story say?" Paula pulled out her phone and read. 5 years ago, Sarah Martinez bought dinner for a homeless stranger at Mike's Diner on 7th Street. She gave him her last $20, money she needed for her own bills, because she saw someone who needed it more. That stranger has never been identified, but Sarah's friend says she never regretted it for a second. The room seemed to tilt. Mike's Diner on 7th Street. 5 years ago. The last $20. Marcus stood up so quickly he nearly lost his balance. "Where's that diner now?" Paula looked confused by the intensity of his question. "It closed down about 3 years ago." "Why?" Marcus wasn't listening. He was already striding toward the recovery room, his heart pounding. It couldn't be coincidence. It was impossible, but it had to be true. The woman he'd been searching for, the stranger who'd saved him on his darkest night, had been lying on his operating table. He'd held her heart in his hands. He'd saved her life with the skills he'd rebuilt because of her kindness. He reached the recovery room and stopped at the window, looking at Sarah's unconscious form surrounded by machines. The familiarity he'd felt made perfect sense now. Somewhere in his subconscious, he'd recognized her. 5 years ago, she'd been thinner, more worn down, but the essence of her had remained the same. The same eyes that had met his across that diner. A nurse approached him. "Dr. Chen, is everything okay?" Marcus realized tears were streaming down his face. "It's her," he whispered. "After all this time, it's really her." Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days, her body fighting its way back from the edge of death. In her fever dreams, she revisited every moment of her life, every choice, every sacrifice. She saw a mother's face, heard her voice speaking those final words about kindness. She saw the young man in the diner, his trembling hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She saw the long, hard road she'd walked, every stumbling step that had brought her to this moment. On the 3rd day, she woke fully. The first thing she saw was Lisa's face, puffy from crying but lit up with joy. "You're awake." "Oh my God, Sarah, you're really awake." Sarah tried to speak, but found a breathing tube still in place. A nurse noticed her distress and gently explained they'd remove it soon. Dr. Chen wanted to be present when they did. An hour later, Marcus entered the recovery room. He'd barely left the hospital since the surgery, monitoring Sarah's progress obsessively. His colleagues had noticed his unusual attachment to this particular patient, but attributed it to the surgery's complexity. Only he knew the real reason. Now, seeing her conscious, her eyes clear and aware, emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Ms. Martinez," he said softly, approaching her bedside. "I'm Dr. Chen. I performed your surgery. You gave us quite a scare, but you pulled through. You're going to be fine." Sarah studied his face, that nagging familiarity stronger now that she was clear-headed. She knew him somehow, but her mind was still fuzzy from the medications. After the breathing tube was removed and Sarah could speak, Marcus asked Lisa if he could have a few minutes alone with his patient. Lisa looked uncertain, but something in his expression made her agree. Once they were alone, Marcus pulled a chair close to Sarah's bed and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," he began. 5 years ago, I was at the lowest point of my life. I'd lost everything to an addiction. I was living in my car. I'd stolen from my family, destroyed my career, alienated everyone who'd ever cared about me. One night, during a rainstorm, I walked into a diner with just enough change for a cup of coffee. I was seriously considering ending my life. Then a stranger bought me dinner. A woman with sad eyes who looked like she had nothing, but she gave me everything. Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Her hand moved to her mouth. "The meatloaf," she whispered. "You ordered the meatloaf special." Marcus nodded, tears flowing freely now. "You saved my life that night. I've spent 5 years looking for you, trying to find a way to say thank you. And then you end up on my operating table, needing your heart repaired. Do you understand what that means? I got to save you back. I got to hold your heart in my hands and fix it, the same way you held my heart in your kindness and fixed it." Sarah was crying too, overwhelmed by the impossibility and beauty of it all. "I never knew," she managed. "I never knew if you made it, if that meal mattered." Marcus laughed through his tears. "It mattered more than you could ever imagine. I checked into rehab the next morning. Your kindness became the foundation I rebuilt my entire life on. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about you. I thought about how you'd chosen to help me when you had every reason to choose yourself." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the miraculous symmetry of their stories. Finally, Sarah spoke. "My mother told me something before she died. She said when you have nothing left to give, that's when giving matters most. I didn't understand it then. I was so angry at the world, so tired of struggling. But I gave you that meal because I saw my own pain in your eyes. I gave it because I needed to believe that kindness still mattered." Marcus reached out and took her hand gently. "It matters more than you know. Sarah, I need to tell you something else. The surgery was complicated, expensive, but you don't need to worry about the cost. I'm taking care of it, every penny. It's not even a fraction of what you gave me." Sarah started to protest, but Marcus held up his hand. Please, let me do this. You gave me my life back when you had nothing. Now I have everything, and I get to give you yours back. It's not charity. It's symmetry. It's the universe keeping its books balanced. Over the following weeks, as Sarah recovered, Marcus visited her every day. They talked for hours, sharing their stories in full detail. Lisa would join them sometimes, amazed by the impossible connection. The fundraiser had raised nearly $50,000, which Marcus insisted Sarah keep for her recovery expenses and return to nursing school. "You're going to be an incredible nurse," Marcus told her one afternoon as they sat in the hospital garden, Sarah finally strong enough for short walks. "You already have the most important quality. You understand suffering. You've lived through it. That makes you capable of true empathy." Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "What about you? How did you end up in cardiac surgery?" Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "After that night, after you showed me that goodness still existed, I realized I wanted to spend my life fixing broken hearts. It seemed like the most direct way to honor what you'd done for me." 3 months later, Sarah was cleared to return to her normal life. She'd aced all her post-surgical checkups. Her heart was strong, functioning better than it had in years. Marcus had become not just a surgeon but a friend, a constant source of support and encouragement. He'd introduce her to other doctors, helping pave her way back to nursing school. On the anniversary of that rainy night at the diner, Marcus and Sarah returned to the location where Mike's diner had stood. It was a coffee shop now, modern and bright. They went inside and ordered 2 cups of coffee, sitting by the window where Sarah had once sat alone and afraid. "To acts of kindness," Marcus said, raising his cup. "To the ripples they create," Sarah added, touching her cup to his. "To the way they come back to us when we need them most." As they sat together, 2 lives saved by a single choice, Sarah thought about her mother's words one final time. She'd given when she had nothing, and in doing so, she'd planted a seed that had grown into something beautiful. That seed had saved Marcus, who'd used his second chance to save her in return. The circle was complete, but it wasn't ending. It was expanding outward, touching everyone they encountered, proving that kindness was never wasted, that every small act of love sent ripples through time, creating miracles when they were needed most.